Hello and welcome to the Radiate Wellness Podcast with your host, metaphysician, Reiki master, and hypnotherapist, Christy Clemens Hoffman. Each week, we will discover teachings, tips, and tools to radiate your best life ever with practitioners, authors, and luminaries to help you on your path. Wellness, joy, peace, abundance. What do you want to radiate?
Hi, and welcome back to the Radiate Wellness community. Today, we radiate conversation with Jennipher Walters. We just met the other night, seriously. And I was like, hey, you want to be on my podcast? Hi, Jennipher. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm excited we connected and are now having this conversation.
That's so funny. Yes, I was hosting an open mic night at a lovely little bar and tavern downtown. And I loved the poetry that you read. And I was so happy that you got up and read. And then we got talking. And I found out that you're a wine educator. I have never heard of that. So that's why I wanted to talk today because, yeah, it's kind of a specialized thing is wine, but it's so common. It's so universal. And I'm always looking for interesting things that honestly our listenership might be interested in and might not know very much about. So as you said before we started recording, wine can spur conversation. Conversation can spur connection. Connection spurs community. So I think it's a natural fit to talk about bringing people together and what it is that brings us together. So what is a wine educator anyway? What do you do?
And don't we all need to be together more, a little bit more on the same page with a little more shared conversation and connection? So a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, I fell in love with wine a long time ago. It was just kind of a hobby. Became more and more interested in the winemaking and found all that to be really fascinating and kind of through the connection of us meeting through poetry, very artful and very mindful, very deep rooted in what's growing and from the whole vineyard to the bottle to the packaging and the labeling and all of it. I fell in love with the entire story and decided I wanted to get more of an education myself. I had a really good friend, Lisa Barber. Her and I sat down and kind of had these conversations about what could we do with this? Should we try to transition our professions over to wine? And I have a background in health and fitness, writing and blogging, as I showed you before this. So I was like, okay, let's see if we can do this. And so we sat for certification. There's a number of different certifications you can get in the wine industry. We went with the Wine Spirit and Education Trust, which is a little bit less focused on service in restaurants and is more about marketing and talking about wine and education. And so after you can go up through 4 different levels, her and I have been through level 3, past level 3 with distinction, which I'm very proud of. And so for the last couple of years, we've been teaching wine classes and taking a really kind of non-traditional approach because as beloved as wine, I feel is, I mean, most people, if you give them a glass of wine, they're not going to say no. It can still be pretentious. It can still be a little overwhelming. People still get a little bit freaked out about looking at a wine list at a restaurant or going into a store or like, am I going to mispronounce this? Am I going to like this? Should I spend the money on this? There's just a lot of kind of hangups around it. And her and I are very much the idea that wine is really fun and wine should be about bringing people together. It should be about conversation. It should be about connection. And it can be done in a really safe space where you can ask questions and not made to feel stupid or not be afraid to even ask questions and be curious about it. Because at the end of the day, curiosity is a wonderful, beautiful thing to have in the world. And there is no way that almost anyone can be a full wine expert because there's so much wine out there. There are so many regions. There are endless changes happening within the industry and climate and vintage variation. And there's no way to know everything. So what we try to do is get people together that have a little interest in wine or like wine. And we sit down for 90 minutes and usually talk through 5 wines, maybe 6 wines. We talk about different styles. We talk about winemaking. We talk about how to taste wine. We answer questions. And a lot of times we will incorporate different elements like junk food. So a lot of times people care about pairing, like what wine should I order with this meal? If I'm going to have people over, what should I serve when I'm making pot roast or something? So we've done classes that are like pop rocks and bubbles.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah. Or we'll serve like a Grenache with like Oreos or something just to kind of make it, instead of making wine that's like snooty elite thing, just being like, no, you can have a whole lot of fun with wine, especially with food pairings. And so Pop Rocks and Bubbles is always fun. And that's almost always paired with like a brut rosé of some kind. But you like put the strawberry Pop Rocks in your mouth, you have them kind of explode. You have it with the wine. You have the wine on its own. You see how the flavor changes. And then you have these kind of cool conversations and a shared experience over your mouth exploding with bubbles in it, which is really fun. And then people that either know each other or don't know each other just begin talking to each other about that because they're like, oh my gosh, this is this. And then like, oh, did you notice that the vanilla came out more when I had it with the Pop Rocks? But if I have it on its own, if I have it with this other flavor, it mutes it. And why is that? And then we begin having kind of really natural conversation back and forth about wine that just leads to really, really, really cool places. And at the end of the day, people come out and they're like, I had fun. B, I tasted some like great wine. C, maybe I learned some things. And lastly, maybe I even figured out some things that I don't like in wine, which is also really, really helpful when it goes to making decisions on the kind of continuing on your wine journey, your evolution, because everyone's palate kind of like my palate's still changing and evolving over time, which I think is fascinating too.
That is fascinating. Yeah, wine is a whole experience. It's a journey. And I mean, yes, you can get the cheapo wine, you can get the very expensive wine, but that doesn't necessarily gauge how we enjoy it, right? So, what makes wine so complex?
It is endlessly fascinating and quite literally, maybe not so much like the grocery store wine, because most of the wine you're going to get at the grocery store is made to drink pretty much right then.
Right.
And you're not going to get a lot of bottles that are going to change from year to year because they're trying to create this really consistent, normal product that people like. If you pick up a bottle of Kim Crawford Sauv Blanc, it is always going to taste like Kim Crawford Sauv Blanc for the rest of time. Right. But when you kind of go into the wine shop and get something that doesn't have to be expensive, like you were saying, and to your point, it can still be $12, $13, $14. That bottle will literally change differently, like taste differently over time, which I think is a fascinating thing. And there's also some studies that show that even like the music that you're listening to can kind of affect your flavor profile. Obviously, food can affect it.
What?
I know.
The music
And mood.
Well, yeah, that makes sense. So the music that you're listening to can affect how you taste the wine.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
I can pull out, if you want it for the show notes, I can try to find the study. But they literally had people listen to different types of music and then try the wine, and it affected how much they enjoyed it and what notes they came out of it. And that is like the coolest thing ever.
Because I love music and I love wine. So that makes sense.
Me too. Well, I have a lot of Instagram accounts, but one of my Instagram accounts is Straight Up Now Wine Me, which is a Paul Abdul reference, which takes a wine and I pair it with a song. So I try to find like interplay between either the flavor or the branding or the brand with a song. And I think there are a lot of people that are into wine are also into music. And I think it just kind of goes back to wanting to have a very mindful experience where you listen to music and you're kind of taking in that and you're taking in the emotion and the lyrics and kind of like setting an ambiance. Wine can do that as well. And part of being a wine educator is bringing out the mindfulness and tasting wine. So I usually talk a lot about, okay, we're not just drinking the wine tonight. We are going to drink the wine and have fun. Yes, we're going to do that. But we're also going to slow down and we're going to taste the wine. And tasting the wine is a different mindful experience than drinking. And akin to music, it's like actually sitting down and like listening to a record versus going about. It's different. The mindset.
Different, right? You sit down and you really listen to an album, you listen to a song, and you hear all the different notes, you hear all the different lines, you hear all the different textures in it.
Yeah.
You miss if you're just, at a concert or you're just listening in your car while you're running errands.
Yep. And that's the same as a wine. There's a lot of different structural components in a wine. As a wine professional, we're kind of taught to see if those are in balance. And a lot of times we'll evaluate wine based on a criteria that's preset, like body, tannin, structure, sweetness, alcohol. Are those kind of all in check? Are they together? And then you objectively are like, okay, whether or not you like the wine or not, you put that aside. And then just like, how is this wine? Is this a quality wine? Does it have complex flavors? Does it have a long finish? These are kind of the things that make a good wine. And then you get to kind of come back and put yourself back in the situation, much like music, where you can say, this is a good song. Do I like it? Do I not like it? And then you're like, okay, some music just like hits you and you're like, oh my gosh, this is clearly speaking to this feels like a soundtrack of my life. And wine also can hit me that way. And I think whatever kind of you're into, that's kind of the wine aha moment that you hear people talk about when they say like, oh, I had my aha wine, the wine that kind of like changed my life and made me realize, oh my God, this wine is like a magical experience experience. And that's kind of hard to always articulate exactly why that is. But like when it happens, it is an undeniable moment when a wine just like completely knocks you off your socks. And usually with that, it is going to be a flavor or an aroma or something that really speaks to your soul or to a place in time, because smells and flavors are almost like a vocabulary, right?
Right.
Of experiences that we've had shared, and they're linked to memories and things. So I think a lot of times it hits something like that that's really personal. And then it's a different experience than maybe you've had flavor wise. I also tend to taste a little bit visually. So when you get into, we can go over the 5 S's of tasting if you want, where you see the wine professionals kind of like do a bunch of gross stuff, swirl it around in their mouth, then aerate, where you like suck air in, which seems really rude and disgusting, but it does change how you taste wine. You kind of get the full experience in your mouth, back to that mindfulness.
No,
And
and
then
then I am interested in the
yeah,
factors. Like, we can get to
okay,
that later, but
yeah,
very interesting.
yeah. And then how it really finishes on your palate, and then paying attention to the finish. The finish is like a really big deal in wine, where you sit there and, you swallow it or you spit it out if you're tasting professionally, or you're tasting through a bunch of wines and don't want to get drunk and blow your palate entirely. And then you kind of see how long the finish lasts. And is that finish complex? And does it change? And so a lot of times with tasting, you'll see people, I use my hands a lot just when I talk in general, but especially with wine, I'll be like, okay, well, I have this wine. I'm like, this one Pinot Blanc is like really round. I taste it and it's just really round. And then it kind of does this thing, and then the finish kind of goes here, and there's a low note, and there's a high note, kind of like music. And then it like trails off, and it's really lovely and beautiful. So
Right, right.
yeah, back
Now,
to mindfulness.
now, not everybody tastes wine in the same way.
Right.
Right. Why is that?
I don't know, but it is fascinating. Yeah. And I always think it's always fun to taste with other people, which is also why I think wine education in classes is really cool, because you'll have someone explain it in one way or taste something and say it in such a specific way. Like some wines are highly aromatic and almost like perfumed. There's this
Right.
wine out of Argentina called Tarantes, and it's like rose petals, rose water. It's heavily, heavily roses. You either love it or you hate it. But it's interesting, even if it's dry, it almost seems like it's sweet almost. And you have someone that's just like, oh my gosh, this is like dried rose potpourri that my grandmother had in her bathroom when I was a kid. And then you have someone else be like, oh my God, my grandmother had that too. I know what that is. And you have someone else is like, yeah, it's almost like spray that I have, like a rose. And then someone else is like, I'm kind of getting like a lemon note, or is anyone else getting lemon? And then you start kind of going back and tasting it again and being like, okay, I can get the lemon. And then my job as a wine educator at that point is to be like, okay, let's go even deeper. What kind of lemon is it? Is it lemon oil? Is it lemon zest? How ripe is the lemon? And then you start getting really kind of geeky, but it's also kind of fun. And then other people would be like, man, I don't get that at all. I get this. And you're still having that cool conversation together.
Absolutely. Because I find that when people are describing things, they'll suggest a word or a thing that is like immediately sparks, it just like invokes something,
Yes.
right? So when they're describing the texture, the flavor, the notes, there's like, oh, right, that's there.
Yep. And so often, because I get together with a group and we blind taste wine regularly, which is really fun because, well, you're trying to figure it out. So it's kind of like a puzzle, but you're also going in with no preconceived notions as to what it is, what it should be. You don't know how much it costs. And so it's even playing field as well, which is fun to do with people to kind of take any sort of like marketing or messaging.
It's more expensive. It has a nicer label. It must be better.
Right. You've been told it's better. You've been told it's bad. It's just a way to just be really, really objective about it and kind of follow your gut. But even in doing some of like the blind tastings, just enlightening to sometimes be like, man, there is some sort of note there and I just cannot place it. I just can't. What is that? Can someone please tell me what that is? And if someone says it, you're like, oh, thank you. Thank you. Now I know what that taste is, you know?
No, I love that. I love that. And you had mentioned mindfulness with wine, which completely makes sense. We need to be focused and mindful to really have the full tasting experience and just aware. I had a mindfulness expert on the show. Oh, I don't even know how long ago. It's been maybe years. And she was talking about doing these mindfulness workshops in big organizations. And she'd hand everybody a piece of chocolate and tell them to go sit down at their seat. And then she'd say, now put your chocolate in your mouth. And inevitably, a handful of people who said, "Oh, I already ate it." And she said, "Okay, here's another one. Now put it in your mouth and be mindful about it." And people were tasting notes in the chocolate they never had before.
That is actually an exercise that I did in my previous career with the bottomed girls. We would do a mindfulness exercise where we set a timer for 5 minutes and be like, okay, here's a little piece of Dove chocolate. I want you to just sit with this and take the full 5 minutes to really enjoy it. Because most of the time it is more about quality than quantity. And if you slow down and really enjoy something, a lot of times when you're craving something, it's like, what do you actually want? What do you actually need? And maybe it is just 5 minutes to sit there.
Right. Exactly. You don't need to eat the whole chocolate bar.
Right.
What's going to satisfy you is just that mouthfeel, just that.
Right. Yep. And that moment, just that moment to kind of like come back to center. And actually, a lot of wine pairs with chocolate. So that's fun. You can sit there and have, wine, chocolate, and really treat yourself. Right.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Well, you're based in Kansas City. I'm based in Kansas City. You do this for places around Kansas City, wine bars, wine shops, et cetera, with the food and the wine. How can somebody have that experience, like maybe at home? They want to know what to pair together.
So I run Wine Schooled KC, which is an up and coming concept that we're launching in 2025. We're going to have some online resources that people can download to kind of better understand what to do. Yeah, we're figuring all that out. I'm really excited. The possibility of Zoom classes is also something for people outside of Kansas City, which I think could be really fun. I mean, there's a lot of other books and things that can take you through, but I do think kind of like some of the in-person classes with a wine educator is just incredibly helpful for starting a wine journey and continuing. Yeah, some of the stuff I've been working on has been like little downloads on like how to pronounce 10 really impossible grape varietals. Like here's a little cheat sheet of things you should try and how to say them because it's hard. There's all the languages.
Right.
Because wine comes from everywhere.
Well, and as somebody who is very social, I am getting out in the dating world, et cetera,
Yeah.
it's kind of a nice thing for people to talk about. It's a common denominator.
Yeah.
And the more that I feel like I can speak intelligently about something, I think the better.
Yeah.
It's impressive when somebody can pronounce different wines.
Then I know, like, oh, it's a Nebbiolo. Like, okay, here we go. Yeah, Gewürztraminer. Like, oh, you speak German? Nope, I just know how to say Gewürztraminer. Just practice it. Yeah. But I think if someone's just at home and they're like, okay, I'd like to get a little bit more from whatever I'm drinking, and it doesn't matter what it is, the 5 S's is just a really great place to start. And it is just a very sensory, hold on, let me get a wine glass. We should have done this later and I could have.
Oh, right. I know I'm missing something here.
We could have had wine, but I'm never far from wine glasses. Yeah, just that's my life. So very simple. It's 5 S's. You're going to first see. So you see within your glass, you'd hold it up to some sort of a white background to see if that's color. If you're a wine nerd, you're going to be looking for things like browning on a red wine will indicate age, color. Well, darkness on a white wine will also indicate age. If you look at just kind of the intensity and how much the color kind of like extends to the rim or doesn't extend to the rim, can kind of give you an idea on what the grape is, how full the body is. And sometimes I find not many people focus on the sight of a wine unless you're in the industry, but some varietals are just strikingly beautiful in my mind. And it's nice to just take a moment to be like, oh my gosh, look at that color. A really rich Malbec a lot of times will almost be like this striking purple. And that's really cool. It's really pretty. Or you might get some Italian wines like a Nebbiolo that are going to look almost thin and watery and bright red, but on the palate, they're actually pretty big wines and really tannic and drying. And so it's kind of funny to see something that you think is going to be lighter, not be lighter. So that's C. And then you swirl. So you can swirl with your wrist. You can put your glass on your table and you can kind of just rotate around. So that's kind of the trick for not spilling, is to do it, keep your stem on the table. So you swirl, and basically that's just releasing all of the aromas that are inside the glass and getting them out, because the majority of your taste is actually going to come from the smell. Generally, whatever you're smelling, you're also going to be able to taste, which is also kind of fun. Like, oh, I smell this. Can I taste that? Or I taste that. Now, can I go back and smell that? Just to kind of work on some of those sensory skills. So your third one's going to be to sniff. You sniff through the wine. A lot of times you'll get your main aromas from the grape variety itself, which are called your primary aromas. Those are going to be a little bit higher up in the glass. A really aromatic wine, you'll be able to smell from here, like that rose wine, the Tarantas we were talking about. You can kind of smell it from chest level. Others, you'll need to cut your nose a little bit more in, but a lot of vital characteristics will come from up here. As you go farther into the glass, you'll get a little bit of secondary and maybe tertiary notes, which are going to be more indicative or indicate more winemaking, which would be barrel aging, something called malolactic fermentation, which can lead butter or yogurt. Think about like a big Chardonnay that you've had that have some of those notes. That comes from winemaking, not the grape itself. And then if there is a little bit of age on it, you start to get some kind of dried or almost nut-like characteristics. So that's your snip. This is a big, broad overview of kind of stuff that we do in class, which is kind of fun when you have actual wine in your glass and you can kind of really get into all that. But then you end up sipping. And as you sip, you go ahead and you pull some air into your mouth to kind of naturally aerate, if you will. You have an aerator, like some of those little tools, gadgets that you see, and further puts more oxygen into your mouth and explodes kind of those aromas and flavors. Get it around all parts of your mouth so that your full taste bud can kind of get all wine on your whole tongue. And then your whole mouth too, swishing it around allows you to see a better sense of, is it a full-bodied wine? Is it a really drying tannic wine? And the body, we tend to talk about it being kind of like is it a skim milk or a 2% or a whole milk? And that gives you an indication of body. And typically body is determined by alcohol levels too.
This thing that you're doing in the mouth, this would be the swirl, the number 4, the fourth.
This is the sip.
Oh, sip. Okay.
Yeah. Fourth is sip. And then the last one is savor.
Savor. Yeah.
And so savor is the one where you're then seeing what it does as a finish. Does it linger? Does it cut off short? Can you go to the bathroom and come back and still taste it? Like really, really high-end wines will have that. And then in that process too, are there any big flavors that are really coming out? And I generally encourage people, if they can't name something like really specific, then just see if you can pull out, is it a red fruit? Is it a green fruit? Is it a black fruit? Because it's probably going to have some sort of fruit on it. What kind of fruit is it? And then once you kind of get that, you're like, is it a tropical fruit? Then you can be like, okay, well, which tropical fruit is it? Okay, maybe it's pineapple, maybe it's papaya, or if I love red fruited wines, like my go-to favorite red wine, always have red fruit in them for whatever reason. That's my jam. I'm like, the cherry, is a strawberry, yeah, is a raspberry. How juicy is it? Is it cooked raspberry? Is it raspberry fruit roll up? Is it raspberry jam?
Right.
Yeah. Like all of those kind of nuances that are really fun. And you can also some wines will even have like savory components, like thyme or like tomato leaf. There's a tallow, Sangiovese, like a Chianti. So yeah, it's just really it's fun. There's so many pieces of wine that almost feel childlike to me, like being a kid again and getting out. Remember those markers that were like,
oh, yeah, I love those.
Like those. So almost to kind of treat it kind of like an exploratory creative game. What are we doing here?
Well, just to continue this metaphor, just like the markers, the grape markers, that's my favorite, but they do not smell like grapes.
They don't.
No, nothing like grapes. And wine, I find that people will say, oh, this has notes of pear. This has notes of cherry, notes of vanilla. It's kind of to me, it's like the suggestion of these things without like really smelling like vanilla or cherry or pear.
Yeah. The power of suggestion. There's a lot of conversations that'll have you like, man, I wonder if I'm only getting that because you said that. Like now I can only think about that. The funny thing too, to that point, is that there are some flavors in wine that are kind of seemingly unnatural. Some Beaujolais, especially Beaujolais Nouveau or anything done with a style called aromatic maceration in terms of the winemaking process, can almost give you candied flavors like banana runts. Or sometimes I get hot tamales and I'm like, this is the strangest thing. Obviously, banana runts are a very heavily processed food.
Opposite of wine.
Right. And like, here I am tasting it in this wine.
Oh, that's like nothing against banana runts. I love them.
The same. Yeah. But just a weird, or bubblegum, like you'll get bubblegum. And I'm like, what in the world? But the cool thing is, and I think the place where people kind of are afraid to say what they smell or taste to think it's like going to be wrong. It's never wrong. If you smell it or you taste it, that is your experience and that's your experience. That's it. That's true. And it can be anything. And the other thing that I think is cool, when you get people from different cultures together to talk about wine, we all have that different vocabulary of experience and taste and smell. We've all had different foods. We've had literally different produce and dishes and different climates and all kinds of stuff. And so you get someone coming in and may call some spice that I don't use, I don't know. So I would never call that because experience with that. But now I want to go smell that spice to see what that is and vice versa. So I think that's another really, really cool thing that I'd like to see broadened a little bit in the industry, and something that I hope to do with Wine School PC is to really make it more of just an overall inclusive community where everyone's welcome with that. Because in some of the education programs, you're pretty pigeonholed to follow these rules and do these things, which is good for testing and good for having a baseline. But I think there's just so much room for new perspectives to come into it.
Right. And, we've had wine thousands of years, of course, and we've had trends in wine. We've had trending language to describe wine, et cetera, et cetera. So, it's going to always be evolving, and our knowledge about it, why we taste the things we do, how we taste the things we do, what brings out what in a wine, it's always going to be evolving and changing. So I think it's great to stay on top of any trends that are coming in and on top of any education trends coming in. Now, how did you get involved in wine in the first place? I don't want to take too much of your time, but I would like to ask you a few simple favors. First of all, please rate, review, and share this podcast wherever you're listening. It sounds like a simple little thing, and it is, but it has a huge impact for us because it helps other people find us in the podcasting algorithms. I don't know how it works, but I do know that it helps a lot. Next, if you would subscribe or follow wherever you're listening, whether that's YouTube or Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you're listening, just hit subscribe or follow, and that helps you and it helps us. It helps you because then you receive notifications when we have a new episode that's out. It helps us because, again, algorithm magic, I don't know what happens, but it helps. And then finally, you can support our podcast in a tangible way by going to radiatewellnesscommunity.com/podcast and then click on support the show. Now, we have a new feature too. We are now on Patreon. You can find us on Patreon. You can also find the link to Patreon when you go to radiatewellnesscommunity.com/podcast. So on Patreon, for $3 a month or $5 a month, you can support your metaphysical and spiritual growth. You can learn about upcoming guests, and you can get early and ad-free versions of the shows. So please support us. This podcast is free for you to listen, but we have costs, and quite frankly, they come out of my pocket. So if you like this content, if you get a lot out of it, please see what you can do to give back. Thank you so much.
I liked it. I really liked wine.
I like wine too, but I don't know that I'm ever become an educator about it.
Yeah.
Chuck from Trader Joe's.
Yeah. I tried damn near every probably domestic wine under $20 at Trader Joe's during COVID. Like during those years. I mean, really, I bought so much wine there and drank a lot of wine, tasted a lot of wine. But if anyone needs Trader Joe wine recommendation, I'm your girl. I got you. Yeah. Because I think what they have in almost all their stores is pretty similar. Although I'm a big fan, obviously, of like small shelf cycle for your wine. No, but in 2007, Paso Robles, California, I fell in love with the beautiful area, specifically the Templeton Gap ABA. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous, beautiful. I was like, oh my God, pretty sure I lived here in a past life, or my soul was here or something. Like, this is a wonderful, wonderful place. And I fell in love with the landscape. And then I really got into more of the wine making and really was able to hear some stories and just kind of seeing the passion that you get these smaller producers, and they family owned, and they are so passionate about what they're doing. And to be around that level of passion and intentionality and focus is inspiring and infectious. And the fact that they're then creating a product from that you can take home and you can experience, and then have your own experience around that And that's the other kind of mindfulness that I like to think about wine beyond just the looking and the tasting and the savoring, is really thinking about where that bottle came from, who made that, what was going on with those grapes. And this is when you get the wine people that like really wax philosophical about things. What was happening in the world at that time? And then kind of what has happened since then? And then how is it changing the conversation that you're having at your table? And so to go back full circle here, get back to that conversation piece, to that connection piece, which inevitably leads to the community piece when you do it enough together.
Oh, absolutely. And wine does bring people together. I mean,
It does.
start to relax, they enjoy themselves, conversation flows, and community gets built. I love what you're doing with this. This is so amazing.
Thanks.
How can people get more information about what you've got going on?
Yeah. So as we build and grow and develop things, definitely give us a follow on Instagram at Wine Schooled KC. You're going to get schooled. So we're trying to be playful and fun. It's not just wine school. You're going to get schooled, but in a very fun way. And we are also hoping to bring actual certification to Kansas City if you're Kansas City, because as of now, you have to go outside of Kansas City to take tests. And so we'd like to bring that kind of more in-house to build that community here. But as we're making like t-shirts and sweatshirts and different kind of fun things, I made this really fun one that just says Chenin Blanc is one of my favorite grapes. And so it says Chenin, it has flowers on it and it's pretty. And then we've got one up that says for the Cab Franc lovers in the house who like a good pun, which we're word people. I could franc this cab all day, which is one that we have on a sweatshirt right now that's in our shop. So that's fun. And that's at wineschooledkc.com. And then there's an email list that you can sign up for too, and then get alerted to when we're doing classes or adding new products or different things that are happening.
Oh, that is so cool. And then you also have Fit Bottom Girls.
Yeah. Fit Bottom Girls, I did transfer ownership of that site earlier this past year. And so that relaunched on October 1st. We started in 2008 with the message to basically love yourself as you are. Fit bottoms come in all shapes and sizes. You're more than the number on the scale, and you deserve to be fit and be active and work out to empower your life, not to try to shrink down. And your life not gonna be better if you lose weight necessarily. It's not gonna solve all your problems. Why don't you do what makes you feel good? And it was kind of a big at the time, like middle finger to a lot of stuff that was going on in magazines and in women's health writing. And I looked at the landscape and was like, screw this. Now, at that time, diet culture wasn't really discussed. Now it's very heavily discussed. And we were a lot of those early discussions and shifted the market. And I'm incredibly proud of that work. Through that, I did a podcast, wrote a couple books, transferred ownership after I got to a kind of point, once I started getting into wine, where I was like, I have said so many things about fitness and health and wellness that I don't know if I have more to say. I'm ready to kind of move on, but I didn't want to sell the site because I knew that if the site changed, it would probably end up in hands that would be the exact opposite of what I was trying to do with it. And so it kind of sat dormant for a while. And then my business partner and I transferred ownership over to one of our former writers who's a health coach and is taking it in this beautiful direction of which I am like a super fan, where it focuses a lot on perimenopause and menopausal women and takes still Fit Bottom Girls ethos and takes it to that. I mean, because we've all aged. That's my age. We're all right there in that age group, the original readers, and being like, yeah, you've been told to age this way. No, we're not aging that way. We're going to age how the hell we want to age. And we're still going to be healthy and fit and not kind of follow this narrative that we're supposed to dress a certain way or act a certain way or whatever. So it's still got this like little rebellion undercurrent with really solid information. So Allison, the owner now, has got a great team around her and is doing amazing things with that website. So yeah, give at Fit Bottom Girl a follow too. It's rad.
And speaking of aging, we age like a fine wine.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. With class, soften our tannins.
Love it. So Jennipher Walters with winesschooledkc.com.
Yep.
Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about one of my favorite things.
Thank you. It was so nice to connect with you the other night and now. Wonderful.
Don't know what to watch next? Decisions. Well, we've got some suggestions. You can click this little video here and watch that. It's something that we think you're going to like. If you like the last one, you're going to like that one too. You can also click on the subscribe button. And if you do that, then you'll get notifications whenever we have a new video up. Win-win, right?